in the near future. And so that's sort of the focus for this morning's event. And in the recent past, they've done some other training out to varying distances, both pistol and rifle.
Why is this type of skill training important to the overall nature of asymmetric warfare?
Well, we are, by our nature and by inception, an operational advisory group. That's an Army unit that goes out and we advise Army and Joint Force units throughout the world. And so some of those areas are conflict zones, like Iraq and Afghanistan, for example. And so it's very important that your skills, your combat skills, defensive or offensive, are well honed. And so this is part of any unit's preparation for those kind of eventualities. And we just happen to focus on the pistol and rifle marksmanship more than probably your average unit, because we just don't know what sort of situation our advisors are going to encounter, especially when they're embedded with another unit, whether it's a Army unit or joint force unit.
And again, that was Lieutenant Colonel Justin Sapp. Let's go to Regina, Mechanicsville, Virginia. You're on with Colonel John Pekosik, the commander of the Asymmetric Warfare Group. Go ahead.
Good morning, sir. I would like to know how this urban training conflicts with the Policy Comitatus Act. And I'll take my answer off there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for your call.
We have to explain a little bit of that too, sir.
Roger. Well, thank you very much for the call. And again, it doesn't conflict with the Policy Comitatus Act, and really that's that the United States Army doesn't do law enforcement duty. That's the duty of our civil authorities. But we do operate within environments where there are civilians and soldiers operating together. Again, to answer your question directly, it doesn't. But what it really does is provide us an opportunity to become accustomed to operating in areas where civilians and friendlies are operating. It makes our soldiers better and able to perform their mission. As Justin Sapp had talked about in that segment there's a number of basic skills that we want all our soldiers to be able to do. We want them to be able to shoot and hit their target. We want them to be able to maneuver environment. Those are the essentials of any military operation. But when you overlay that on top of the complex world that we live in, we want our soldiers to be able to operate and decide. It's not whether you're going to hit the target. It's whether you should shoot or you should not shoot, and be able to make decisions very rapidly in a complex environment. And that's really what we're trying to achieve.
You talk about civilians and military together. One of the replicas here on site is a metro station. Very lifelike in the means. Why is it important to have that? And how do you kind of account for dealing with civilians in these kind of situations?
Well, our soldiers have got to be able to operate in all different
environments. Because you train where you fight. They training to kill Americans. This is a warning to all Americans. They are training to kill Americans. Look at that main street. Main streets only exist in America, man.
Just like any part of the facility here, we're able to tailor it to the mission set that we're going to face. But in this case, when you look at underground rail systems, those are prevalent in most major cities.
Look at this, guys. They are training to come and get us, man. I'm telling you. You better get ready.
Where I've trained, where I would have the opportunity to understand what would happen if I encountered a facility like that. What decisions do we want our soldiers to make?
Where else do they got them in Afghanistan? They got trains in Afghanistan.
Recover someone that might be injured, or you're trying to fight your way through it. Let's do that here at Fort A.T. Hill and provide our soldiers that complex.
Come on, man. Look at this. This is straight American coming to train to kill you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Here I came across some police officers training in a cold store at a mall for some kind of urban warfare. My question is, with terminologies like the One World Government and the global society, with the Patriot Act being in place, and Barack always using the terminology domestic terrorism, can at any time this asymmetrical army be used here in the United States against the people?
The short answer is no, and there's really not an asymmetrical army per se. But what you bring up is an interesting point when you say you see training in a facility where maybe they have to close off a mall so they can kind of train on what are they going to do if they've got to react to an incident like that happened in Kenya just a short time ago, where there was an event and people go and train them to do that. Well, instead of shutting down the mall for law enforcement to train on those things, why don't you bring them to Fort AP Hill where they can replicate it here and actually get those techniques down so we can do what we're going to ask them to do without being an extra imposition on the environment we live in. When you talk about the metro station, that's another great example of it. I mean, I as you, Pedro, have a commute to work each day, and I would be pretty disappointed if the metro wasn't running on time because someone else was training in there. So we can do that kind of thing here and not inconvenience our day-to-day lives.
Talked about training taking place in international areas. As there are considerations for if an incident ever happens in the United States and how the Army deals with that?
Well, Pedro,
see, what they're doing is letting us see the strategy before they implement the strategy, because a closed mind will never see this as training to come and get Americans.
To provide relief, as they've done in numerous occasions when there's been floods or hurricanes in particular. This is the kind of thing that they could do, is get an opportunity to do those kind of tasks. I know with the recent hurricane that we had a few years ago in New York, there were metro stations that were flooded, and this would be
but you didn't need
you could figure out those
urban soldiers in there for
asymmetric
warfare. Asymmetric.
That's one of those things that the Army doesn't have a lot of luxury. When we're called on, we're not the kind of we're expected to be there and be ready to do whatever we're asked to do. If the Army's called on to help out in a situation, one wouldn't expect it to say, well, we'll be ready in a couple weeks. That's something we haven't thought about yet. Let's get ready for it now. When the American people call on the military to perform a mission, we expect them to be ready, and that's really what the beauty of the facility is here. We're able to look at some of these unconventional things that we might ask our soldiers to do and make them ready for it.
David, Killeen, Texas. Hi, go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to make a comment. I'm retired military, and back in the late 80s, we did some training here at Fort Hood at the mock-up station. And me being an armored crew member and a tank commander, it helped our troops, our team, our platoon, to actually learn how to fight in urban warfare. But when we went overseas, we knew what to do, and we were uniformity. Everybody knew what they had to do. And as a tanker, and, you never get off your tank unless you have to, but now if something happens to your vehicle and you're on foot, you know what to do to help out the infantry or the medics or whoever to survive, for one. And the training itself is worth it. All of our soldiers, airmen, and Marine Corps need to go through some kind of training like this here because they need it when they go overseas.
I really appreciate that comment, and I myself had served in a number of types of unit, and a few years ago when everyone's familiar with the Battle of Fallujah, and I had the opportunity to participate in that part of the conflict, and as you talk about armored vehicles operating in an urban environment is something we didn't train on. When I was training up before we went over to Iraq, we trained on large ranges in Germany. We looked at how are we going to engage enemy tanks at a range of 2,000 meters, and that's what we trained for. But when we were called upon to do it, and we were moving down the streets of Fallujah with M1 tanks engaging the enemy at a very, very close range, I wish I would have had that kind of training before we were called to do that live in combat.
If I understand it correctly, the asymmetric warfare group had its start dealing with IEDs. Is that correct?
That's correct, Pedro. And as the conflict evolved about 10 years ago, the enemy engaged us in an asymmetric way. The enemy engaged us with IEDs, which was something that we didn't face very often. These improvised explosive devices were a threat to our vehicles. Our light-skinned vehicles weren't equipped to deal with that. And so born of that was the asymmetric warfare group. And what we were charged with doing is, let's look at these threats, identify these gaps before we face them so that we can be prepared for them beforehand. And exactly as you talk about the IED, and the world has changed even in the last 10 years since the group was formed. When you think about what we're seeing on television, just an example is these small unmanned aerial systems. So you see these quadcopters, and I remember during the Super Bowl, they had put out a thing, no quadcopters, everybody's got them, they're flying them around. around, and you see them all over the world. Even in D.C., there you see one that landed in an unexpected area. So this is an asymmetric threat, and so that is one of the missions of the asymmetric warfare group. We look at this and say, well, how can we use this? How can the enemy use this? So unlike the encounter we had previously with the IED, we can prepare our soldiers how to react to that. And this is one of those places that we've done that. It's just an example. It's just a very short time ago at this very training center, we would run a platoon through this area and bring in those small little quadcopters and see how they react to them. And then we're able to say, well, if you're encountering a threat, what should you be doing? How do you identify that? How do you stop it? What's it doing? What's he watching? What's he reporting back? That's exactly the kind of thing that we do here at Fort A.P. Hill, is develop the tactics, techniques, and procedures to counter these emerging threats, just like we did with the improvised explosive devices.
John, Buffalo, New York, go ahead.
Yeah, folks, let us not kid ourselves. This country is never again going to send its troops into mass urban warfare. That's all gone. If we get into a situation where someone's going to ask us to take out a whole city of people or a bunch of terrorists, we're going to light it up, or we're going to nuke them. There's no question. This facility is to train the soldiers to fight in American urban cities. And it's coming, folks. 25
You hear that, guys?
years ago,
So caller, let me ask what convinces you of that?
Okay, now let me finish, please. After they dropped the wall, I went into Poland, and I was appalled to find out that people were required to carry identification with them at all times and let the government know where they were. I was appalled at that, being an American citizen. Okay, that's 25 years ago. The other thing, one last comment. I live in Buffalo, New York, and I see in South Buffalo, there's a large military storage center that has suddenly popped up just off the highway, where there's all kinds of military equipment being stored there for some reason. I can't imagine why. I'll take your comments off the air.
Colonel, go ahead.
John, you really can't predict what the future is going to do, and to say that we're never going to do anything in the future, I think in terms of the Army, would be short-sighted. When you talk about fighting in an urban area, when we fought in Vietnam in the Battle of Hue City, that was a huge urban fight, and we learned a lot from that and said, wow, there's a lot going on there. And to say we'll never do it again wasn't correct. We, as soldiers and as a nation, we don't know what the future holds, and we can't predict it. But to say we're not going to fight in a particular way, well, our enemy is got to vote in that, and they're going to determine how and where we may have to fight in the future, and we can't exclude any possibilities. And as an Army, we've got to be prepared for those possibilities. As I had said with the previous caller, is that I've been called on to do a lot of things I never thought I would have to do in the military, and you always think about how could you have better prepared for that with time and facilities, and that's really what we're trying to achieve here, is provide our soldiers the best chances of not only surviving but thriving in combat. Everything that we do at this location is really designed to increase our soldiers' survivability. So I have no idea what the future is going to hold, and we spend a lot of time, talking about what the threat could be. And as soon as you decide, the threat will be that we'll never fight in cities, then in an asymmetric warfare way, our enemy will say, well, the U.S. is not prepared for that. That's when we need to draw them in. So we've got to be prepared for a broad spectrum of operations. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
We've heard a lot of calls this morning about people expressing a concern. Is there a perception issue then about the work that you do here and the type of training that you do you think?
Well, as people look at what's available on the media, and the media is much more open than it had been in the past in terms of what's available on the internet to what's available on print and TV media, and there's a lot of different opinions out there, and I think that you'll see a larger, broader scope of opinions, and some people may gravitate to a certain opinion that may suit their preconceived notions, and that's why an interview like this is so important. important because really we're opening up to the not only to the United States but the world and say, hey, this is what we've got here, and there's nothing to hide. And in fact, what we're trying to do is say, here are the American soldiers. These are your soldiers.